All right, good morning. Well, the point of this tutorial today is to teach you how to deal with some basic data in Excel, to create a frequency table or a pivot table, and then to use these data and the pivot table in order to make a simple bar graph. After we go through how to make a simple bar graph, then we'll do a more detailed set where we look at tab 2, the nominals tab down here, where we have more than one group, and we will look at mosaic plots, and we will look at plotting of two categorical groups at the same time. Okay, so you can follow along with any set of data that you may have where you have some categorical data, because bar plots are going to be used for plotting categorical data. But it's probably easiest if you follow along using the tutorial data that I'm using. So that is this week 2 tutorial bar chart demo data file that is on Blueline and that you see I have open here. And here this is results of a survey looking at Creighton biology students. They were asked what their most hated course in biology was. And you can see that we have respondents and we have the course that they told us was their most hated course. And if we follow down, you can see that we have 75 data points in this data file here. So one of the very first steps in any sort of analysis of categorical data is to first figure out what your categories are. Now, you may already have a predetermined list of what these categories are, but oftentimes in a study that collects categorical data, such as this one where we were asking what is the most hated course, well, they could tell us any course that they had taken. So there may be things that we initially have on our list and we think we have a very well-defined list of categories, but then we may have an extra category pop up here or there. So very first step is making a very clear list of what exactly those are. So as you can see, my computer is trying to update here. Just close those out. Okay, so the very first step, we can look here. We can sort our data. So there are several different ways to do this. You can click in a cell, and you can hold down Shift and then move your mouse and then click at the end of your range. So you can see here this has selected all of the data points. Alternately, you could click, hold down Shift, and use your arrow to move once to the right. And you can see up here in this box we have one row and two columns selected at this point. And you can watch how that changes as we move down. And you can just hold the arrow, or you can use the page down key until you get to the bottom. And when you only have 75 data points, it doesn't take that long to do it in this manner. However, there are usually some tricks in Excel. If we click on Respondent, and I am doing this on a Mac, so the shortcuts that I talk about will be Mac shortcuts. If they are not the same, I will sometimes try to cue you into what the PC shortcuts would be. If I forget to do that at any point, or if you just forget what shortcuts are at any point, you can always just Google that. All right, so if we come up here to Respondent, and now if we hold down Shift and hold down Command and use our arrow, if we move the arrow to the right, now it automatically goes over and selects course. Well, this is what would have happened if we held Shift and arrow anyways. But the magic happens now if we're still holding down Shift and Command, and if we hit the down arrow, now when I scroll, you can see that with just a few keystrokes, it automatically went to the farthest reach of our data here. Okay, so I'll try and make a little tally over here of some of the things that we are learning in this video here. And of course, as I do this, you get to watch me and all of my misspellings. Okay, so we learned how to select cells, and because this differed for the Mac and PC, I'll go ahead and write that in here. So on a Mac, remember we held Command and Shift and used those arrow keys. That was our easiest way to select a large chunk of data. And then on the PC, you're going to want to hold Shift and Control and arrows to have the same effect. All right, so the other thing that we can do, if we go back here and again hold Shift, Command, arrow to the right, arrow down, that selects everything, we can sort our data. So we have our data selected here, and if we click the Data tab and the Sort tab right here, we have our Sort dialog box pop up. Now you see this little toggle here. It currently says My List has headers. You notice before we selected where it says Respondent and Course. Okay? By clicking that our data has headers, it allows us to click here in this column and select based on the column header. So here we want to order our data or sort our data by course. Okay? So if we hit OK, now you can see that the respondents are no longer in order from 1 to 75, but you can see that all the behaviors clump together, all the biostatistics clump together, ecology, genetics, physiology, etc. All right, so then in trying to figure out what our categories are, we can come over here and let's just write course, and we need to get counts. Okay, so if we select that just for aesthetic purposes, I'll bold that. And we can start typing them in. We can look over here and we see behavior. So we can type in behavior. We see the next one is biostatistics. Okay, we can type them in this way. We can also just go down and click ecology and hit Command C on a Mac to copy, Command V to paste. We can get them in this way. And we've got genetics and physiology. Okay, so here we have our 5 courses that Creighton Biology students selected as their most hated course. And now we need to get counts. So counts are simply the number. So one way to do this is just to brute force go through and count them up. So behavior, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we counted 6, we enter 6. Okay. Another way that you can do that, if we select this first biostatistics here, and I'm going to hold down Shift to click on the N because I can see the entire extent of biostatistics. And because we sorted it, we know that all of the biostatistics entries are right beside each other. In doing that, if we look up here, as I am selecting that, we can see the number of rows. And it seems to only show while you have the mouse pushed down to select. So we see 30 there. Okay, so then we can come up here and we can enter a 30 for biostatistics. Now, with a fairly small data set, this isn't very challenging to do, but there are easier ways to do this. Okay? So one easier way to do this is to use a formula to count. So if we use the count if formula, anytime you enter a formula, you're going to first hit equals. Okay? So equals, and we want to do count if. And as you start typing this, you'll see the helpful hints of functions pop up there. We want to use the count if. And if we see it and we hit tab, then it shows up. Now, what this does is it gives you some hints here. So we know the first thing we want to do is we have a range, and then we have the criteria. So the range is where you want it to count. So we want it to count up the number of course entries, so the number of behaviors, the number of biostatistics, the number of ecologies, genetics, physiologies that are in this list. Okay, so our range is happening in column B. Okay, so if we enter for our range, okay, there are a couple different ways you can do this. You can use your mouse and drag. So we can go over here with our mouse and we can select this first entry here. B4 is where we have the first one, and we can hold down Shift and use one of our several methods that we've talked about for selecting this range. Okay, there we go. We have that. Okay, and then we see that we need a comma here. So comma, and now we need the criteria. Okay, so one way to enter the criteria, here we're looking for the number of ecologies in this row. So if we want to enter text, if we want to look at whether or not the cells in this range, B4 to B78, match a text string, we want to put quotation mark and then copy, or not copy, rather write the word. Okay, so ecology. Now we're done typing this formula. If we hit enter, now we have a count. Okay, all right, so now we can copy. This is a formula now. One of the nice things about formulas is you can copy them. So we can now copy this formula. We can either hit Command C and then Command V to paste it in the bottom cell, or if we simply, and I'll make this a little bit bigger so that you can see that here. See at the bottom there's this little green square. If we click and drag down, then we drag that formula down. Okay, but let's look at what happens. So this formula here in E6 is count if B4 to B78 is ecology. Well, when we've dragged that down, now we look here and we're in the genetics where we're supposed to be tallying how many entries for genetics we have. Well, this formula is looking for ecology in B5 to B79. So there are two problems here. Okay, let's deal with this problem here of matching this word first. And we'll go here back to cell E6 here. Let's actually delete this out. Okay, so if we type in ecology very specifically here, first of all, what if we made an error in typing? Okay, what if we forgot the O? All right, well now we have a 0. And clearly we know this is incorrect because we see there's entries for ecology. Okay, so doing it the way we've done it, typing in this value, we could make some errors in spelling. So let's delete out this criteria here. And instead, we know that in this cell, E6, we want to tally the number of course entries in column B that are equal to this. Okay? So if we simply click in this cell, D6, see that D6 pops up here. Now when we hit enter, it's going to query our range that we have told it in column B, and it is going to count up how many entries in column B look like this, because this is our criteria, D6. Now when we copy this down to the next cell, and if you double click in a cell that has a formula, you will see the formula pop up. So equals count if B5 to B79, that's a problem we'll deal with in a minute. Our criteria is equal to D7. So now we've copied the formula from above down to E7, and it's looking for cells that match this. Okay, this is good. This is a much more automated way and a much less error-prone way of making sure that we are correctly matching the course names listed in column B with the course names listed in column D. Okay, but we have that whole range issue to deal with. So there are a few ways to do that. And at this point, these don't have formulas, so I'm just going to delete those out. All right, so if we look here, and notice when you double click, you're talking about a range here, B4 to B78, so it's highlighted that range for you. And then you also enter criteria, D6, so it highlights that, and notice how things are also color-coded for you, which is quite nice. Okay, so if we want to reference a range, but we don't want it to constantly shift that range, we can use the trick of using the money sign to force the formula to look where we want it to. Okay, so we want it to look in column B, and because all of the formulas that we're going to enter are going to be in the same column, column E, we can keep the B as it is. But if we go in, and 4 is where we start here, so if we go in and put a $ before the 4, and we also want to put a $ before the 78, okay, now when we click in this column, and we drag this formula down, if we look at it here, now the formula in E7 is going to count the range B4 to B78. That is equal to D7. Hit enter again. In E8, it's going to count the range B4 to B78. That is equal to what we have written in D8. Okay? So now, using this formula, we see that we are always looking in the right range where we have our data. Okay. Another trick that we can use, because usually you'll have your data oriented in a way where this trick I'm going to show you now will typically work. If we look in column B, okay, these values here, we have words on top of it, but there isn't actually anything written in this cell. There's not anything written in B2 either. B3 has our title. And then once we get down past our last data entry, we don't have any other data down here. So that is why this shortcut is going to work. If you had other data in this column, this trick would not work for you. But here, if we enter equals COUNTIF, instead of going in and entering a specific range, which is a perfectly legitimate way to do it, entering B4 to B78, using that money sign symbol to make sure that we're staying in rows 4 through 78, we could enter B to B. When we do that, B colon B, this is going to query the entire column of B. But since our data are arranged in the manner that they are, this is totally fine. Okay, so then comma, and now our criteria, that trick that we just learned of clicking into this cell because we want to count how many behaviors we have. So we click here and enter. Okay. Now we're going to copy this down, and when I copy it down, notice that this 7, 13, and 19 here, they're not going to change. Okay, so this is one way that we can get our counts. And if we come back over here, we have learned a few more things here. So sorting of data, referencing cells and ranges, and using that money sign symbol. And we also copied formulas. All right, so the next thing that we want to do, there's an easier way to come up with this that we just generated. All right, so the easier way to do that is by use of a pivot table. And initially, pivot tables can be a little bit confusing for students, but once you get the hang of them, they're actually a really nifty way for you to be able to truly query your data and figure out exactly what these different categories are. So in order to do this, let's go back over here. We'll click on respondent. We will use our shortcut of holding down Shift, Command, and the arrow keys to quickly select everything. Okay. And now what we want to do is click on Insert, and we want to insert a pivot table. Okay. When we do that, you see this dialog box, Create Pivot Table, pops up. And because we selected the range of our data before we inserted the pivot table, we already have that filled in here for the table or range. If you did click Insert Pivot Table before you had selected your data, then you would simply click into this box and highlight your data there. All right, so we want to select the table or range. Our range is in here correctly. And then we want to choose where to place the pivot table. So you can put it in a brand new worksheet. I tend to find that to be a bit unwieldy because then you have to flip between worksheets in order to see it. So I like to put it into the existing worksheet. Now when you say to put it into the existing worksheet, it's going to ask you where you want to put it. Okay? So you'll click in here, and then once you see the cursor in here, you can then move your mouse over, and I'm just going to select D11 simply because it's right here and it will keep it in line with the rest of our data. So here we have 1 nominal, which is the name of our sheet, D11. Okay, so, okay. Now, this is the part that gets a little confusing sometimes, but if we look, okay, we've got respondent and we've got course. Okay, so we want to sort by respondent and course. When we do that, it has automatically filled some things in here, but you want to double check and make sure that it's actually filled things in correctly. So here under rows, we have course, so row labels, and we see our different entries here for course. That's good, but these numbers are a bit off because you know that there's only 75 respondents. But here we have very large numbers, and that's because this is the sum of respondents. So respondent over here was numbered 1 through 75 because that was student 1 through student 75. We don't want the sum of this. So what we want to do here, if we see values here, it's automatically filled in sum of respondent thinking that's what we want it to do. And sometimes computers are smart about figuring out what we want for us, but lots of times they're not. So we want to click this little I here, and we want to tell it what it is we want it to do. So we want the count, not the sum. So we click count, and then we click OK. And now we're looking at the count of respondents. Okay, so this is all good. We'll close out this pivot table builder dialog box. Okay. We've learned pivot tables as well now. And if you look here now, we've got behavior, biostats, ecology, genetics, and physiology. We can see that these row labels match nicely with what we copied over. In a small data set, if you have no errors in the entry of these words, no misspellings over here, this is what you might expect if you were conscientious and careful as you were going through. If we look at our numbers all match nicely. So you can do a few things here. If you've made your pivot table and you find that you want to change what you're looking at, you can always click this box and alter what you're looking at. But we're pretty happy with what we're seeing here at the moment. Okay. Right now I'd like to show you one trick though for why I like to use pivot tables for this type of thing. All right, now to do this, I'm just going to quickly alter some of the data over here in column B. Okay, I'm going to change behavior. Let's say some student entered the British spelling for behavior, so they added a U in there. Okay, so we hit enter. All right, well, our pivot table here, if we click on that and then we click refresh data, okay. Now that we refreshed our pivot table, we see a difference between the pivot table that is automatically querying column B to see what our categories are and how many we have, and a difference in what we copied up here, because maybe when we copied we knew behavior was on our list, but we didn't think about the fact that there may be some different spellings. Okay, so over here, when we entered our formula, whether or not we were telling it to reference D4 where we wrote behavior by hand, or whether we were writing the text in ourselves using the quotation mark, behavior, end quotation mark, we would only count 5 here. Okay? And we know that there are 6 because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even though this one spells behavior in a different way. Using a pivot table allows you to very quickly and easily identify those issues. Okay? Once you identify those issues, then you can sort your data. We've already sorted it, so we don't have to go looking for it. But if, for instance, your data were still sorted by respondent, okay, as you scroll through this list here, it's a bit harder to just scroll through column B, especially if you had hundreds and hundreds or thousands of data points, and find that one instance where it says behavior with a U. This is why using a pivot table is so handy. All right, so I'm going to hit undo to undo the sorting that I just did there, because I simply want to change this behavior back. Okay. Now, of course, your pivot table, you have to refresh its data again. Okay, so when we do that, we now see that everything is adding up and looks just like it did a few minutes ago before I went on that tangent. But I thought it was important to go on that tangent just to illustrate to you how it can be very beneficial to use pivot tables like this to really get a handle on exactly what those categorical data responses were. All right, so now what we want to do is take these data that we have tallied up the counts for, and we want to graphically represent what we're seeing here. All right, so one of the bad things about plotting from pivot tables is that if the pivot table updates or changes, or if your numbers get moved around, sometimes there isn't a perfect coherence between the graph that you've created and your pivot table. So what I like to do is we have our pivot table generated. We have checked to make sure that all of our categories are matching up. We don't have multiple strange spellings of different things. If we simply copy this, okay, so we select these. Now I'm going to hit Command C to copy, and then I'm going to just come down here. Now to paste, usually paste is Command V, but because this is a pivot table, if we hit Command V and just paste it in, then we're going to have formatting in there, and all we want are the values here. So here we want to right click and we want to say paste special rather than paste. So if we say paste special, click values, now what we have are just the values. And if we click in these cells and you look up here, as we sort of click through them, you see that these are just numbers, these are just words. Okay? There's no formatting associated with these. All right, so just to make sure we keep our titles here, it's clear what we have. I'm going to go ahead and put titles there and bold them just so that we see what we've got. Okay, so we also just talked about paste special if we just want values. And now that we have learned how to make these frequency tables, so making this frequency table, this is the same thing. You could do it using the pivot tables. There are other ways that you could do it. But here's what we have. We have a frequency table. So the frequency or the count of all of the different response categorical response variables. All right, so I have selected our data here, and now we want to insert a bar plot, okay, or a bar graph. So when you're with your data selected, you click on Insert, and you have this region here for charts. So sometimes it's fun just to see what the recommended charts are. Sometimes it works nicely, other times not. Here we see that the #1 recommended plot is a clustered column graph. Now this does happen to be what we want to select, but I want to show you where you would find that. So here we have bars, okay, up and down bars, vertical bars, and if we click this drop down arrow, we see that we have many choices in here. Okay. At this point, even though we only have one group, we want to select the clustered column. Okay. So now we have a plot that magically shows up when we click that. All right, and I'm just going to drag this over here and plop that down. Okay. Going to just change its sizing a little bit. Notice how when you drag it around, it resizes your chart. Okay, so now we have a bar chart. Okay, we see each one of our courses listed across the bottom, and we have counts along the y-axis. Now, usually when Excel spits out a graph for you, the graphs that Excel initially spits out are not really formatted in the way that we like to format scientific plots. So a lot of the next steps are sort of going through this chart and taking things away, adding other elements in, making sure that we get the chart to look like we want it to look for proper presentation purposes. Another consideration, though, is if we look at the order of our bars. So at this point, there really is no rhyme or reason to the ordering of our bars. Well, that's not entirely true. We have behavior, biostats, ecology, genetics, physiology, so it's an alphabetical order at this point. But really, there's no reason to expect that alphabetical order is going to tell us really much of anything about this. So one thing that we can do, remember our ability to sort data. So since this is a small enough chunk, I'm just going to click with my mouse and drag to select all the data. And as long as I'm selecting both columns here, this is going to work. If we come up here to data, and let's sort this again, okay? Here we don't have header rows, so we want to unclick that. So we know that we've got column D is course, column E is count. Right now, these data are sorted alphabetically by column D. But what if instead we sorted by column E? And we could do smallest to largest. It's a little more typical sometimes to go largest to smallest, but depending on your data and depending on what it is that you were trying to show in your graph, that will sort of dictate what the best way to sort your data are. Right? I'll click OK. Notice now that the order of these has changed. We are now aligned in descending order, and we can see that these bars are now moving in descending order. Okay. Sadly and unfortunately, we see that the highest number of responses in terms of most hated course was biostatistics. I'd like to think these are made-up data. Okay, so now let's sort of dive into this chart and see about making it look a little bit more like the plots that we see in scientific papers. All right, first of all, we don't usually use these titles, so the easiest thing to do is to just click on it, you see it's outlined, and hit delete. Notice it goes away, it resizes our plot. Also, grid lines. Sometimes it can be useful to have these grid lines, but a lot of the times it's not very useful. And we tend to try to make scientific plots in as minimalistic as possible of a way. So if we click here, notice that when I initially clicked, it had selected the entire range. If we do that and hit delete, well, in this case, nothing happens. Sometimes you will click on an element in a chart and you change it drastically. And initially you will maybe freak out and panic. Don't panic. Remember that you always have the undo button that you can click. But if we're trying to get these grid lines, notice we have these little dots on the side of each one up. Now that we've selected them, we can just hit delete and they will nicely go away. All right. The other thing, for some reason, Excel likes to not give you a Y axis on your bar plots. If we, excuse me, if we double click on the axis, or then we have this format axis dialog pop up over to the right. Alternately, if we right click, we can say format axis, and we get the same thing show up. Now, if we click this little paint bucket, we have fill and we have line. We want to change the line. So right now, it's set to auto and it's set to color none. So if we change color to black, we can see that we now have a black line. Okay. Click back on where you see these columns. We want to have tick marks, so we're going to click tick marks. And notice that major tick marks is set to none. That's why we don't have any of those little ticks sticking out. We say outside. Now we see those tick marks showing up pointing towards the outside. Okay. Now that was formatting the y-axis. Now we want to change our x-axis to match that. If we click here and the paint bucket, that's set to gray. Okay. It's best usually to use black for these. Now I will state that if you are putting together a poster or if you are putting together some sort of PowerPoint presentation, your choice of colors and backgrounds and all of these things might be different aesthetically because of the medium that you are using. But typically when we are preparing plots in this class, your goal is to be preparing them to look as much like a scientific graph as possible. All right, so now we have labels down here. You can play around with your tick marks also. So right here, the major tick marks is set to none. We could say outside. Okay, if we do that, that's one strange thing about tick marks on a bar plot. The tick marks show up in between categories here. So some people like that, some people don't particularly like it. I think it would be better if the tick marks showed up sort of in the middle of the bar. You can play around with this a little bit to see if you can get that to happen. But here, it really likes for there to just be even numbers. So, 1, 2, 3. I tend to just take them off. If you had many more categories and it wasn't clear, then you might need to put those tick marks on. But really, you just want to ask yourself when you're making any plot, does this plot, is it clear? Can I tell what's going on? Are things overlapping? Is it confusing in any way? If it's confusing in any way, then that should tell you right away that you need to make some adjustments. Also notice that we don't have axis labels. We've got numbers, but we don't have anything telling us what exactly those numbers mean. So if we single click here, or if we just click on our chart, and you see we have chart design up here in format. If we click chart design, you will see something called add chart element. If you click add chart element, you'll see several things on here. Some of these things like error bars we'll get to later, and trend lines. But if we look at axes and we look at axis titles, okay, so you see right now we don't have a check mark next to either of these. Okay, if we click on primary vertical, now we have one. If we click on this and select everything so that we can write, we just write number here. Number is a good label here because this is showing us the number of responses listed for each one of these classes. Okay. We also want to add an x-axis label, so a primary horizontal label, and here we could just say course. Remember, if you do like I did there, make sure that you get rid of axis title because that is not going to be very useful. Okay, just make sure it says course, and you might want to drag this down a little because it was looking a little bit too close to our axis. Now, a lot of this is just aesthetics of trying to make this look nice. Uh, if we click here, we've selected this axis, we can alter the font. Okay, so you could come in here and select your font. For example, this would be a bad choice for scientific plot because this font makes things hard to read. Okay, so we'll hit back. But one thing that can be kind of useful, sometimes if you make your axes, label them in a bold font, that can make them pop a little bit more. It can make the graph look a little bit better. You can also alter the size. Okay, see if we get too big, they switch and they start going at an angle. Go back to 11, that looked pretty good. Also, if we're going to bold one axis, we want to bold the other axis. We want to click. Notice I'm just clicking, and then I'm on that Home tab where I'm altering the properties. Okay. Right here, the font on this is a 10, whereas the font on this is a 10.5. Typically, these labels, we want them to be just a little bit bigger, so or at least the same size. So I'll make those 11. And as I'm just making sure, does it look good? Does it look nice and crisp and clean and clear? Does this graph look nice? All right, the other thing that you can do, blue tends to be the default color. So I will tell you right off the bat that any plot that you ever make, if you turn it in and it is blue, we know that that was just the default Excel color. Sometimes that makes perfect sense. Things that you want to avoid though, if you know that you're going to be printing in black and white, avoid using color. Okay? Use either gray or gray scales if you have multiple things, or just make them black. Black and white is a fantastic go-to, even though it's not incredibly exciting. But it's a good go-to because black and white are going to contrast very well with each other, and they're going to print very nicely if you don't have a color printer. Okay, but if we simply just click on the bar, notice that all the bars are selected, and then we have this Format Data Series dialog pop up over here on the right. We are looking at the bars, okay, and if we can click over here to fill, so we've got the fill, okay, gradient fills, picture, texture fills, pattern fills. These are things that you really never ever want to use. Sometimes patterns can be useful, but typically we're not going to want to fill with things like textures and gradients and pictures. If we just go to a nice solid fill, okay, and here you can tell I use orange a lot. One, because I like orange, and two, because yay, go Clemson Tigers. But here we have orange selected. Okay, if we look at, okay, we're done with the fill. If we look at the border, okay, right now it's automatically selecting no color. You could use no color, you could use black. You see that black outlines showed up around our plots there. Or you could match your color. Here it actually didn't have no fill, it had white, but because the background is white, it showed up as looking as though it had no line. But we'll just come here. I don't really want to have a line surrounding it, so I'll just select orange. All right, one more thing that you can do, if we look here, so series overlap. We only have one series, okay, because we just have course. When we get to the later part of the tutorials where we are looking at grouped bar charts with many groups or the mosaic plots, then we will have some series overlap. But when you only have one group like we have here, series overlap doesn't do anything. Gap width, though, will. Gap width is looking at the distance between your bars. So at this point, these bars look like they are pretty far apart. Looks like we could probably use space a little bit better. We can make that width really, really big and make those bars tiny. That doesn't look very good. Again, a lot of this is looking for aesthetics. We could go really small. If gap width is 0, that means all the bars are going to be touching each other. Now, there are some cases where this is preferable and is useful. If you were to do this, probably we would want to put a colored outline or that fill line around the bars just so that they don't merge into each other. But for the most part, this is doesn't really look all that good. So you just kind of move your gap width to something that you feel looks nice. Okay? So there you have it. We have a bar plot for a single group. We have our axes labeled. We have axis labels on here with number and course. And then the other thing that you are going to want to do is you're going to want to make a legend for your table. So if we click here, okay, it's easiest just to write these legends in the cell right beneath your figure. Then you don't have to worry about your figure resizing itself and maybe looking a little bit funny. All right, so here I'm going to call this figure 1. And this is the results of a survey of Creighton biology majors of their most hated course. A very brief description of what this chart is telling you. Another thing that you always want to indicate is sample size. So sample size is 75 declared Creighton biology majors who had taken at least 3 upper division courses. All right, this is information that was critical to how these data were collected. It's important that your graphics are clear in terms of what they depict. So now, one of the things, we have a nice label, the words that are here, results of a survey of Creighton biology majors of their most hated course. Sample size is 75 declared Creighton biology majors who had taken at least 3 upper division courses. But notice that this goes all the way over to here. Okay, this doesn't look very good. So we can take advantage of the merge feature. Okay, so if we click this first cell, hold down Shift, and we can click over here at the farthest right extent of our figure because we want this entire legend to be underneath our figure. We can click Merge and Center. When we do that, notice that now we don't see figure 1 anymore because it's centered this. So we can align it. We want it to be left justified. And we want it to wrap. Okay, well, what I notice here is we don't have all of our text. So again, we can click, and you can click down to the next line and say Merge and Center. If you've already merged and centered once, you may have to click it twice to get the result that you want. It's already wrapping the text, but I can see we still don't have everything. So we click again. Sometimes there's a little bit of trial and error as you do this to get it to look just right. All right, so this merge and center is doing good. We have all of our words in here. The text is wrapping, so it's not going all the way off to the right. But again, we're centered, so we want to left justify that. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so a very nice bar plot, and we have our legend down here. All right, so we can add one more thing to our list over here, making a bar chart. We also learned how to modify a bar chart. All right, so here are just some things that we have learned so far. Okay, and if we close this out and come over, so we're looking at numbers here, and this is useful. It's a nice way to depict these data. But one of the other ways that you can show these data, which might be a little bit more illustrative actually, is to look at the percentage or to look at the fraction. Okay, so I'm going to make another column in our data down here. Okay, so this column that I'm going to make is just the fraction. Okay, and again, I'm just formatting this in bold because the other titles here are bold. Now, you know that a fraction, we're going to have a numerator and we're going to have a denominator. Okay, if we want the fraction of Creighton biology majors that selected biostatistics as their most hated course, we're going to need to divide this count of 30 respondents said biostatistics, by the total. Okay? Now, we know that there are 75 respondents, but because you may not always as easily have that number as readily available, let's just go ahead and I'll show you how you can use a simple formula to get a total. So here we'll say total, and just to make it look nice, I'll bold it and I'm going to justify it. This is just a personal preference here because it makes the table look a little better. And now we know that these are all of our options of responses. So we're just going to say equals sum. Okay. Once you see it show up there, you can, I hit tab before, you can click. Okay. Now it knows it's doing a formula equals sum, and you have parentheses, and now you can you could enter numbers if you were just trying to do some math here, or you could enter a range. I'm just going to click and drag to select the full range and hit enter. Okay. So 75, here we know it should be 75. So this is a nice check on us knowing that we're doing what it is we're supposed to be doing. So now we can calculate our fraction. Okay, so here equals, and we're just going to click in this cell. Okay, notice that it pops up E20 because we're in column E and we're in row 20, and we want to divide that by the total. Now we're going to want to copy this formula. So one thing that we can do, we can very clearly see the cell, we can click it. Now it pops up E25, but we know that when we copy this formula down, it's going to alter this referencing. Because we're going to stay in column F, it's only going to alter the rows, but we wanted to stay in row 25. We wanted to always use this cell. And so to make it always use this cell, we can put a money sign here, and then it's always going to use row 25. And if we just want to, since we're going to stay in the same column, we don't have to do this, but if we put a money sign in front of the E as well, money sign E, money sign 25, it is always going to go to cell E25. Okay? And hit enter. Okay? Now we can click, drag this down, okay? And we see our fractions. Okay. Now we have this beautiful plot that we just finished making up here. Another trick that you can do is you can copy charts. So if we click, we have our whole chart selected. When you click a chart, you can see the data that it's using. Okay, so we've clicked it, and you can do Command C to copy, or you can right click and say copy. And if we, let's give us a little space here, if we paste it now, just Command V, paste, you see that we have a second version of this. It is exactly the same as what we just did a moment ago. Okay, so how embarrassing that you guys see that I misspell things a lot as I type. This is the importance of proofreading and spell check. Okay, so we learned how to copy a chart. Now if we click on this chart here, okay, here we don't want to plot the number. Here we want to plot the fraction. So we still want it to look here, but instead of looking at count, we want it to plot the fraction. So you can simply come up here to this range, see it turns into a little hand, click your mouse, and drag that over. Now see how the plot changed. Okay? Now our numbers changed. Okay, we want to change this because we're no longer plotting number. Okay, so we just double click here. Here we're looking at relative frequency. Okay. All right, so we've got relative frequency for each one of these courses. Now we're looking at fractions. So now instead of seeing, oh, there were 30 students out of the 75, and then in your head you sort of do that mental math, instead of looking at this and having to think about what percentage that is, you can look right here, and because we're plotting relative frequencies, you know that it's 0.4. So 40% of the respondents chose biostatistics as their most hated class. All right, so some things that you can do. If you click here, again, we see the bars showing up. We can format that. We can also just come up here and click the fill color on the Home tab, and that will also change your fill color. So you'll find that in Excel there are typically several different ways that you can accomplish the same task. All right, so few things. If we look here, one thing is this is kind of ugly. Okay, we have 0, 0.05, 0.1, 0.15. We don't have the same number of digits in each of these cases. So we want to fix that. One thing that we can do, we can click on that. Okay, click, right click, format axis, or you just double click, it does the same thing. And we're not really looking to alter any of these things. We're looking at number. Okay, so we can format the number. At this point, it's got category, general. Okay, it's linked to source. That means it's linked to this column where it's getting it from. If we change general to number, okay, you see the decimal places here. Okay, so we could say 4. Just that was simply to show you that it's going to change over here. We don't really want it to be 4. 2 is a good number. Okay, so now, whereas before we had 0.5 and 0.4 and 0.35, and having different numbers of digits made this plot look a little bit ugly, now we can force it to be 2 decimal places. Looking at this, it still does look a bit crowded over here, as though we have too many options. So if we double click that, we see that under the axis options, so our minimum is 0, our max is 0.45, and you can see 0 and 0.45. But then our units. So our major units, and remember when we added tick marks in, we don't have any minor tick marks, but we have major tick marks. Our major unit is 0.05. This is why we go 0, 0.05, 0.1, 0.15. If we change 0.05 to 0.1, okay, now we have fewer values on the y-axis. It doesn't look as cluttered, and this actually looks pretty good. You also saw the bar shortened. The reason that the bar shortened is because we did have a maximum of 0.45 before. Now we have a maximum of 0.5 because going by major units of 0.1, we want it to end with a number at the top. We don't want it just sticking up into the top here of the y without a number at the last extent. Okay, so our plot looks fairly good. This relative frequency is a little bit close. Again, notice that this is aesthetics. Okay, but when you're making these plots, you want to make them look as good as possible. All right, so the last thing that we want to add here is we want a legend. And we were pretty satisfied with this legend up here. We can click and select it. Now notice that this green box that goes around it is selecting a large portion. The reason it's selecting that large portion is because we selected many cells here and merged them all together. So we can copy this, and we can come down here and paste it, and it will take it perfectly from here to down here. Okay. I'm simply going to change the 1 to a 2 because if you have multiple figures in a worksheet like this, you can't have more than one figure 1. So we've got figure 1 and figure 2. You could alter the legend a little bit to indicate that you're looking at relative frequency. or honestly, this legend is really good as it is. You want to be brief, but you also want to be descriptive. And because we have this label here, relative frequency, it's clear what we mean. All right, so another thing that we learned up here with a bar chart after we copy a chart is how to alter the data range for a graph. All right, so there you have it. Just another word of advice as you are working through any files in this class, or really for anything, you always want to save often so that you don't lose your work. Another thing here, if we look at this fraction, if we select these cells, and also we've got a lot of digits in some of these cases. This is just so that you know for this class and sort of for future reference. These little boxes here with the left and right arrows, these will format your cells to have the amount of decimal places that you wish for them to have. And that can be kind of useful from time to time. All right, so if you were doing one of the assignments, you would make your plots like this. If I ask you to explain anything, you could write me notes to the side. See how we had this region here where we entered some notes. You can always format your cells. So if there's something in a file that you want me to see, you could give it a fill. Okay, you could put a border around it. Just some way to make things a bit more clear and obvious that there's something that you are wanting me to look at in your file. Okay? All right, so I'm going to end this portion at this point. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to look at this sheet where in response to, or in addition rather, to the courses that respondents told us were their most hated course. So exactly the same thing that we just finished looking at here, but we're going to add in an additional component of which year they were. So the next portion of the tutorial that you will watch is looking at how to make a grouped bar chart when you have more than one group of interest. This is the second part of the bar chart tutorial, and in this part of the tutorial I'm going to show you how you would make a bar chart when you have more than one group. So in the first part of this, we just finished doing this, and we were looking at how to make bar charts for a single group when we have categorical data. Now in this demo file, the week 2 tutorial bar chart demo data file, looking at the most hated course for Creighton biology majors, we have an additional variable in here, which is year. So in this data tab, the two nominals, I'm just going to quickly change response to course to keep us consistent with the previous page. And again, these are the same data we have here. They're sorted from 75 to 1, but we have the same data. Only now we've added in whether or not the respondent was a junior or a senior. Right? So the very first thing that we need to do is very similar to the first step that we took before, which is figuring out the counts in our different categories. Only now, of course, we have year for junior or senior. So I'm going to click to select respondent, shift, command, right arrow, and down. Remember, on a Mac, this selects all of our data. And then I'm going to insert pivot table. And you'll notice I'm talking a little bit quicker in this portion because these are steps that we've taken already. All right, I'll slow down when we get to the new thing. So here we're selecting the data. Again, it has our data selected that we've already selected up here, so we're good. We don't want a new worksheet. Instead, we want to put it on the existing worksheet. And I'm just going to stick it here on F3. You can really put it wherever. I'm just keeping it close to the data. All right, now What we see here is a little bit different though. Before we only had two things. We had course and we had respondent. But now we have this additional variable in here. So here we want to have course. We want to put course over here in the rows. Okay, so that's our row labels. And we want to have respondent, but again, see these numbers very large. We don't want the sum of the respondents, we want the counts of respondents. But this looks very similar to what we saw before, and what we really want to do is now we need to add in year. Okay, so for year, we don't want that in rows, we'll put that over here in columns. So now we have I'm going to go ahead and close this because this is the pivot table we want. We have each one of our courses, we have juniors, we have seniors, and then we have the totals. So the 6 would be the 2 juniors and the 4 seniors that had behavior listed as their most hated course, so that's a total of 6. Here again we have 75 as our grand total. Okay, we know there were 75 respondents, and we can see that there's a difference in the number of juniors and seniors. All right, so as we stated before, when we are plotting, it's best to go ahead and do the copy paste special. So we're going to select, copy, and put it down here. Remember, we're going to want to paste special values. And here we have our course. Here we have juniors. Now these labels are going to be more important this time because we're going to use them for the legends and our plots. Here, I'll just bold this so it's obvious. So this is our labels, and we'll go ahead and put our grand total here. We're just going to paste special values again, and I'll bold that. All right, so now what we can do is we can select these data of the courses, the juniors, and seniors, and we can insert a chart. Again, we're going to select this clustered column again. Only now we see that we have 2 bars for each one of the courses. All right, so what I am going to go ahead and do now is I am going to quickly fix up our chart here. We click on the legend. Okay, here it's on the bottom. We'll stick that off to the right. Select our fonts. And we're really just doing it exactly like we did in the previous video, where we are fixing up this chart so that it is in a nice way to display these scientific data. Okay. So here, change our axes to black, making sure that our axis titles are bold. Here we want to add a Y axis. So remember, if it's under chart design, axis titles, we're in the primary vertical. And here, again, we're looking at number. And we may want to fix this up a little bit. And we're just trying to make it look nice. I'm just going to select our entire chart and make it a little bit larger. Okay, notice how I accidentally dragged this way out. We can hit undo, or I can just adjust it like this. Sometimes your finger will slip. Okay, come down to here. This looks pretty good. All right, so we have our number, we have our axis labeled. We'd like to put some ticks on here, some tick marks. So remember, if we go to our tick marks, we want our major type to be outside. So this is looking fairly similar to what we had before. And we want to take away the chart title. Okay, and here we are keeping the legend, the juniors and seniors. In the previous plot, when we had only one group, we removed that. But now we need to know which colors represent what. All right, so the other thing that we could do here, if we click these bars here, now we can alter this gap width and the series overlap. So if you sort of play with series overlap, this will spread them out. This will stack them on top of each other. If we take this to 0, then they're going to be right beside each other. And gap width, again, here you're just do what looks good. Okay, that's really what this comes down to. Here is that you want to make a plot that looks nice. All right, so we also need a figure legend. So I'm going to go ahead and save the agony of watching me type it all in and just paste this in right here. This is a legend that I wrote in a different file just to speed the tutorial up a little bit. So we've got results of a survey of Creighton Biology junior and senior majors of their most hated course. Sample size of 75 declared Creighton Biology majors who had taken at least 3 upper division courses. All right, now here we're looking at the numbers. And one of the problems with looking at the numbers here is that we know that the number of juniors and the number of seniors differs. Okay? So what we really want to do here is use the relative frequencies rather than the straight up counts. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I will just select this column because we're going to recreate this table here, only we are going to use some formulas to make relative frequencies instead. Okay, so then we're going to want this to come across the top. All right, now we know that these are our totals here. So what we're going to do is write formulas that take advantage of knowing these are our totals. And this grand total in columns G through I and in row 22. So for juniors, if we want the relative frequency here, we're going to say equals, and we want this number divided by the total. Okay? And this cell is always going to be the total. We always want column or row 22. So we're going to use that trick where we put the $sign. Okay? And when we hit enter, now we have a fraction, and when we drag this down all the way even through grand total, if we click for biostatistics, we double click and we can see the cells light up. We can see that biostatistics is dividing the number of juniors that selected biostatistics as their most hated course by the grand total. Okay? And here we'll just fix up the number of decimal places. Let's just take this down to 2 and center it. And then now that we have all of this selected, we can copy, by dragging, we can copy these formulas over to the right. And I'm just going to bold this because it makes it clear to me that this is where the data are. All right, so now that we have the relative frequencies over here, we can go about copying this chart. Remember, I'm going to copy it for you this time and show you just relatively quickly so that you can see again how we do this. All right, so now we're going to change this plot. Okay, here we're going to change number to relative frequency. But we need to make this plot be relative frequency. So when we click here, we'll click on the blue, see all the blue is highlighting, and it's plotting up here. Okay? So it's fine if it's still using these course names to plot, but if we just want to keep things consistent, we can drag this down, okay? And drag this down, so now juniors is plotting that relative frequency. Notice it totally messed up your graph because now you have fractions and you have whole numbers. But when we click on the red and we do the same thing, we drag that down, we drag our title down, okay? Now it has adjusted, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to go here and change the axis. I'm going to change this to 0.1. Simply because I like the way this looks a little bit better. It's not as cluttered. And just so that it's clear that we are looking at a different plot than up here, I'm just going to select some random colors to change to. Now, this is one way that you can change the colors that I'm showing you here. Remember, the other way is if you click and then you go over here to fill, you can also change the colors in that way. All right, I am also now going to want to put a figure legend here for our new figure, and I'll just copy one over instead of writing it. But we have figure 4, most hated courses chosen by a sample of junior and senior Creighton biology majors. Sample size is 75 declared Creighton biology majors who had taken at least 3 upper division courses. Values are relative frequency of each choice within each class year. That's important to put in here. And because we have juniors and seniors, it's also important because we're looking at relative frequencies. This could be an enormous sample with, 7,000 respondents, or this could be a very small and not incredibly representative sample of 7 students. So it's good to give your audience an idea of what your sample size was. So here we indicate that sample size is little n equals 33 for juniors and n equals 42 for seniors. All right, so now we have a plot where we are looking at relative frequencies. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm noticing in my plot here that my labels on my axes are gray, and always want those to be black, so I'm just fixing those really quickly. All right, so we have similar plots to what we had before, only now looking at grouped plots. And number one difference is we have to keep this legend here. We want to keep the legend. One of the differences here is that we actually have two separate groups. So we want to keep that legend. And you also want to think about how you plot the data. Here we were interested in how different classes responded about their most hated course. Okay, so here we have junior and senior being broken out by color. And that does make the most sense for these types of data, but different types of data might be more illustrative to plot it in a slightly different way. Okay, so depending on what you want to show, really, is going to dictate what the best way to plot the data are going to be. Okay, so this really does show us that difference between juniors versus seniors and makes the most sense, but let's go through a couple different ways that we can look at these plots because you may want to do different types of plots for different types of data. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this plot here that we have looking at number. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it over here. Okay, so we have exactly the same plot. And now what I'm going to show you is how Excel makes it very easy for us to quickly change the way we have plotted the data. So if we look here, go to the chart design, you'll see something called switch row and column. So if we click this, switch row and column, okay, now we are looking at juniors versus seniors on the x-axis rather than courses on the x-axis. Okay? So based on these data, this is actually a bit harder to make the kinds of comparisons that you want to make across juniors versus seniors. Now we can look at from junior to senior. We can see that, okay, there's less red, so there are fewer juniors that select biostats as their most hated class than there are seniors, but you have to sort of jump back and forth from left to right, junior to senior, to make these kinds of comparisons. So for this particular example, it makes more sense to plot it how we have it over on the left. But I want to go through how you look at these plots simply because different types of data lend themselves to different types of plots more easily. All right. One problem, though, is we know that we have a different number of juniors and seniors. And knowing that we have a different number of juniors and seniors means that looking at these raw numbers is not necessarily going to tell us exactly what we want to know. So if we copy this plot again, it's easier to copy and paste a plot and then change aspects of it, change the data that's being plotted sometimes than it is to create a new plot from scratch, simply because we do make so many modifications to the plots sometimes. All right, so I've copied that and now I'm pasting that plot. This is the same plot as we have above. But now I'm going to go to chart design and I'm going to change the chart type. Okay, so when I select this drop down, okay, we're going to go to columns and we're going to select stacked column as our option here. All right, so stacking the columns, now we have taken these 5 separate columns that we have up here and we've put them in nice tidy stacks for junior versus senior. And when we look at this kind of plot here, this stacked column plot, okay, so we can just sort of label this here. Okay, this is our stacked column. And when we look at the stacked column plot, it might give an idea of which is chosen more or less often, but the different numbers in the groups make it a little bit complicated to see that. And also with so many different colors in here, it can make it a little bit challenging to make much sense of it. What we can do, though, with this stacked column, and now that we've stacked the columns, we can go back to chart design, and we can switch the column and rows again. Now, what happens nicely when we do this is that now we can see for each of the courses, we can get a really clear idea of the numbers of seniors in red versus juniors in blue that selected each one of these courses as their most hated. Okay, so this is a much better way to represent these data in a stacked column than we saw just previously with all of the different colors. Okay, so this versus this. This is going to be a lot more informative. So this does give us a nice idea of the different numbers, but we have different numbers of juniors and seniors. And having different numbers of juniors and seniors means that these numbers aren't really all that useful. Okay, we have 33 juniors versus 42 seniors. That's not a huge difference, but it's still a difference. But imagine if you had a sample where you had vastly different numbers. All right, so that should start jogging in your mind this idea of relative frequencies again. However, we can't really use relative frequencies in exactly the same way that we used them before. And the reason why is because we have different numbers of juniors, different numbers of seniors, and different numbers in each of these different courses. So the best way to do that is to change the type of plot that we're doing again. So again, we're going to take this plot, we're going to copy it, and we are simply going to paste it down here. Okay, this was our stacked column plot, and now what we're going to make is a 100% stacked column. That's what it will be called here at Excel. And in your book, this is called a mosaic plot. Okay, so it's not a mosaic plot just yet. That's what we're going to make it. All right, so if we select our chart, we'll go to chart design, and we can change the chart type again. Now, we just selected stacked column. I know that this is jumping off your screen just a little bit, but there's an option that says 100% stacked column. All right, now notice when I just changed this to 100% stacked column, now what has happened is we are looking at a percent. So we've got to change number here to make this correct. Okay, percent. All right, so what a 100% stacked column plot does is it sets each one of these bars equal to 100%. Okay, but 100% of what? So of the students that chose, for instance, behavior, of all the students that chose behavior, of which, just so that we're keeping things straight, if we look at behavior, there were 2 juniors, 4 seniors, for a total of 6. So of those 6 students, it's showing us the percentage that are juniors versus seniors. Okay? So we have the percentage of juniors versus the percentage of seniors that chose behavior. Okay? So this is our 100% stacked column plot. Now, one of the things that you might want to also do is think about the best way to sort your data. Okay, so if we go back and just look briefly at our previous example where we just had the one group, remember when we first plotted this out, it was just sort of a mess based on an alphabetical listing of these courses. But then we sorted our data based on the total counts so that we go in descending order. Now this gets a little complicated when you have more than one group because they're not going to perfectly line up usually. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is I am going to copy our values for this plot right here. Okay, so I'm going to take these values, I'm going to copy them, and I'm just going to paste special values. And the only reason that I'm doing this is so that I can show you how to sort, but I don't want to complicate things by messing with this plot right here. Since we made a bunch of very lovely plots, okay, put this over here. All right, accidentally copy this other chart and just delete that. All right, so in doing this, I copied these over, but if you are thinking ahead, you will probably know that one of the things that happens when you copy this chart is that it's still going to reference its initial location. So when we click here, for instance, it's not coming, the values aren't coming from here. All right, instead, they're coming from over here. All right, so I'm simply going to quickly drag these cell references over. Okay. And as you're following along with me, this is a good practice for you to do, because if you can quickly and effortlessly switch around your data references and copy and paste things in Excel, then you are learning skills that you're going to use far beyond just biostatistics. All right, so here we have a plot. This plot is the same one that we were just looking at. Just to make that clear, I'll go ahead and change our colors back to this lovely green and blue. Okay, but when we're looking at this right now, it is sorted in a particular way, but it's not really sorted in any way that makes perfect sense. So if we look at the green bars for juniors, They're not sorted in ascending or descending order. If we look at the blue for seniors, they're really not sorted in any good order. Really, we're just sorting these courses based on alphabetical order. So, looking at this, we really need to start thinking about what maybe is the best way to sort data when we're dealing with grouped bar charts. So with one group, it was easy. We simply sorted in descending or ascending order. Okay? Here, we can make our best approximation of that. Remember, we're now referencing these cells here. So what we can do, we have our juniors and seniors, and then we have our count, our total percents in each one of these cases here. And if we select these, if we select course through count, go down to physiology here, and we want to sort these data. All right, so my list has headers because I selected course, juniors, seniors, and count in here. Now you can go to column, and if I sort this by count, and I sort it by largest to smallest, just to keep us consistent with what we did before, moving in descending order. Okay. Now, notice that our plot updated, and our cells moved around here. So now what we're doing is we have sorted these data based on total percent here. So 33%, 25, 24, 9, and 8%. So while it's a little bit harder to make a lot of perfect sense out of that looking here, biostatistics was the highest, the most often chosen as most hated course, then physiology, genetics, ecology, and behavior. So sorting it this way, neither the juniors nor the seniors are going to perfectly line up in ascending or descending order, but at least there's some method to the madness of how these data were sorted. And when you give me plots on assignments and on exams, you should be able to explain to me why it is that you chose to sort your data in the way that you did. Typically, there's not going to be any perfect way, but you should give it some thought, and you should be able to explain to me why it is you sorted how you did. All right, so that's it for the tutorials on making a bar plot for a single group, making a bar plot for multiple groups, and then we also looked at how to switch our data columns and rows to alter the way the bar plots look, and looked at some mosaic plots, which can be a good way to represent data when you have many different groups.